It's just interesting, the song Be Here Now. We have a course that's coming up on Friday morning, starting next Friday, on Patanjali Sutras. And the first word is now. Now begins the teaching. And the message is that we only experience the divine now. Not in the past, not in the future, now. Here, now. Thank you, Bruce. Beautiful. So if you came a few minutes late, I mentioned that this Friday is at sundown is the beginning of the Jewish New Year. So I thought in that spirit I would talk about the experience of Moses on Mount Sinai. And some people might say, well, is that historical? Is it not historical? Is it a myth? Just understand that these great stories, it's the meta truth that matters, right? When Swami Nirvanananda was here this past summer and gave a talk at our retreat, he based his talk on, I don't remember the exact title, but on one of the stories from Hinduism. And afterwards he said to me, you know, in the Jewish scriptures, or what we call the Old Testament, but I prefer to call the Jewish scriptures, he said, we have great stories too. And you have to start telling those stories. So if you don't like what I say tonight, please blame Swami Nirvanananda. So most of you probably know the big picture of Moses. I'm going to walk you through it in commentary, and we'll see where it goes. The context of the story is that they didn't call themselves Jews at that time in history. They were the Hebrews. The term Jews came a little bit later on. The Hebrews were slaves to the Egyptians. And Moses was actually born a Hebrew. But the Hebrews were starting to grow in population, so the Pharaoh ordered that all the baby boys be thrown into the Nile. And Moses' mother tried to keep him as safe as possible, but then she figured it was almost hopeless, so what she did was she built a little basket of sorts, put him in it, and floated him on the Nile and prayed that somebody would come and take care of him. As chance would have it, the Pharaoh's daughter found the basket and took Moses in and raised him as an Egyptian, and he was part of the royal court. Now, just a couple of thoughts about that. The first one is, if you were bookies in Las Vegas taking bets that anything good was going to come from that little boy's life as his mother put him on a raft, the odds would have been incredibly against it. So what's the message in that? Whenever God is involved in an activity, just think about this in terms of God for a moment. Everything in creation is caused by something else. That's what the law of karma is about, the law of cause and effect. Everything functions like that in the material world. God, who is outside of time and space, is not subject to the laws of cause and effect. So as when God enters time and space, the energy, the love, the grace, however you want to say it, the power of God transcends the laws of cause and effect. That's how miracles happen. But the bookies wouldn't have seen that. The second thing, and I think many of you could probably relate to this, so genetically, Moses was a Hebrew, but being raised in an Egyptian culture, thinking that he was Egyptian. Now, this is a projection on my part, but I think you will get the point of it. He probably felt that something wasn't right on the inside. He probably felt that he didn't quite fit in, but didn't know why he didn't fit in. And if he were alive in this culture, he would have went to a therapist and say, tell me why I don't fit in, because I should. I'm in a position of privilege. I'm in the royal court. I got life made, and something's not right. And they would have put him on a medication. I'm not saying medication's always bad, but you get my point. So what does that mean for us? I'm willing to bet, not going to ask you to raise your hand, but many of you have felt like you just don't fit in. That something's not quite right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with you. What it means is that you are an old soul. And you didn't come here to play with the toys. You came here to get to the toy maker. One spiritual teacher said that you can always tell an old soul from a young soul when they're born. The new soul comes out and says, whoa, it's great to be here. I'm going to spend the next 100 lifetimes being everything that I can possibly be. It's great to be here. An old soul comes out and says, oh, I'm back. So what I want you to do is see yourself in the story of Moses. Because what the story of Moses really is, it's an archetypal story of how we go from our false self, our surface self, identifying with our egoic self, to identifying with that divine image, with that spark of the divine that is really who and what we are. That's what the story of Moses is about on one level. And so it's really our story. It's a map for all of us. And if you didn't feel like you fit in, you don't. And you're not supposed to. Someone said to me, we were talking about this was months ago, and the person said, well, you're a professional psychotherapist, you're an author, you're married to Vicky, you must really feel like you fit in. I don't. All right? All right. So Moses grows up, and he watches an Egyptian slave owner beat a Hebrew almost to death. So Moses had a lot of pitta, a lot of fire. And I think something inside of him, part of it was his humanity, but part of it was this unconscious identification with his Hebrew genes. And most of you know the story. He killed the slave master. He was so angry and incensed that he killed him. Again, if bookies in Las Vegas were taking bets on that, nothing good's going to come from this man's life, because then he had to be a fugitive. And he did. He went out to a foreign land in the desert, met a woman. She wasn't Hebrew. He married her. Her father was Jethro, and he tended the sheep. He was a shepherd. Not a bad gig, but what I want to point out is Moses is still living, like us, often, at the level of his surface self, his personality. He's not living from his soul, or what Yogananda would call self-realization. He's not living from the divine image. He's still living at the surface, just surviving. I did a Facebook post the day before yesterday, and I mentioned hell, and somebody wrote back, oh, how can you dare believe in hell? Because I've been there many times, okay? Hell's not a place where God sends us to be punished for eternity. Hell is what we create in our ignorance. And when we live at the surface self, at some level, we're living in a hell. Okay? So there he is, a comfortable life. He can pay the bills, got a nice wife, but he's not living from his depths. He's just into survival. We often get caught up with just being into survival. And we have to survive, don't misunderstand me, but it shouldn't be what moves our lives. So what happens? He's watching the sheep, and a few of the sheep run up the mountain, and he's got to go and get them. Not even a great shepherd. All right? Again, the bookies are not very optimistic at this point. So he goes up the mountain. What does the mountain represent? I mean, it's there in all in mythological stories. It's the place where heaven and earth meet. It's a place of transcendental consciousness. Think of the higher chakras. The crown chakra being the mountain peak. That's what the mountain is a metaphor for. What I want you to notice, he doesn't voluntarily go up. There's a circumstance that's a minor crisis or a major crisis that drives him up the mountain. That's how it is for most of us. We don't really begin to go climb the mountain of who we really are, the mountain of our God-given divinity, the mountain of our union with God, until somehow this survival life that we've been trying to put together at some level just doesn't work. Usually some form of suffering is what pushes us up the mountain. That's what Moses does. So he climbs the mountain, and I want you to get these subtleties, okay? Again, most of you know the story. What does he see? He sees a burning bush. Now, what does the burning bush? Well, first of all, I want you to see the burning bush captures his attention. One of the things I say that's so important in the spiritual life is pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Pay attention to what you are paying attention to. There's a burning bush. It catches his attention. Now, he could have said, oh, okay, that's interesting. He doesn't. He pays attention to the burning bush. What does the burning bush symbolize? One of the ways that the Jewish mystics talk about the soul is they call it a spark of the divine. The burning bush is that spark of the divine. Something ignited it in Moses. Something internally was awakened in that moment of the burning bush. And he didn't ignore it. He paid attention to it. Don't we have moments where the burning bush is there? Something stirs our soul into activity. A longing that we had as a child we forgot about, it gets stirred up again. I'm not talking about egoist things. I'm not talking about superficial things. I'm talking about those moments when something inside of us awakens. That's a spark of the divine. That is the burning bush. It's not out there, it's in us. And Moses was wise enough to pay attention to it. Let me just share a little story from my own life that maybe captures this. Most of you know my background. When I was 16, had a profound spiritual experience that turned my life around. And there was a spark inside of me that I wanted to do ministry. I felt called, unworthy but called. Very green, but called. But I was raised Catholic. And everybody around me said, you have to be a priest. And I studied theology. I almost became a priest. But I kept on paying attention to the burning bush inside of me. And I love the Catholic priesthood. This is not a criticism. I just said, no, not in this life. No, it's not it. It's almost it. It's not it. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't it. And there were times as my life unfolded, I missed it. I missed the opportunity. I should have done that. But there was still this burning bush inside of me that said, no, just wait. That's not it. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Notice the burning bushes, those divine sparks when they go off. Something that stirs your heart and your soul. Listen to it. Pay attention to it. Because what was the next thing? Moses realized that he was on holy ground. The holy ground wasn't out there. The holy ground was his soulfulness. It was the presence of the divine in him waking up. That's the holy ground. And we only get to recognize it as holy ground when we pay attention to it. When we nurture it. When we have the courage to listen to it. We have the courage to follow it. Then our insides become holy ground because it's that spark of the divine that is the burning bush inside of us. So he's steadfastly paying attention to the burning bush. And what's the next thing that happens? He has an encounter with God. I want you to hear this. It's very important. We only have encounters with God to the extent that we listen and pay attention to the burning bush inside of us. We ignore the burning bush. Not that God isn't near, but we're not near God. We come face to face with God when we listen to our own souls, to that holy ground within us. Then God speaks to us. Now, we tend to think of spirituality as being a noun. What do I mean? You know, you meditate and then you get self-realized and you get God-realized. It's half true, but it's only half the truth. Moses was, in his own way, meditating. He was in touch with that spark of the divine within him at this point. That wasn't enough to take him all the way. So what does God say to Moses? He gives him a commission, a job. He says, Moses, I've heard the cry of my people. You go to Pharaoh and you tell Pharaoh to set them free. And then you bring them back to this mountain where they can worship me. Little sidebar, I don't want to get... Freedom is not about doing whatever we want. That just binds us up. Freedom is loving truth, beauty, and goodness. Freedom is living our life according to the highest possible good we can imagine. Freedom is when we worship God on the mountain because we become whatever we worship. So God gives Moses this commission. That's a big job. First of all, he's a wanted man in Egypt. Secondly, he's going back as a Hebrew. He's not going back as an Egyptian in the royal court. Thirdly, he's asking Pharaoh to set his people free. Now, there's two takeaways in terms of nurturing our soulfulness. The first one is essentially what God was telling. It's very simple. We can apply all this to our lives. What God was telling Moses to do, tell the truth. That's it. Just go to Pharaoh and tell the truth. You can't own another human being. That's against the laws of nature. That's against how God has set things up. Just tell the truth as best you can in every situation. That doesn't mean that you blast people. It's not what we're talking about. But that you listen to the truth, you follow the truth becomes part of God. That's how our soul awakens, because our soul is aligned with the truth, because our souls are aligned with God. The second thing, very important, just as important, the way our soul fully blossoms and develops is we have to serve something other than ourselves. Who are the people that have the most meaningful lives? People who serve something other than themselves. People who live their lives according to love. Truth and love. That's how we nurture our soulfulness. That's how we grow. Moses wouldn't have been Moses if he just stayed on the mountain in the bliss that he was experiencing there. Yogananda says that life is mostly about service. Meditation, service. Serving something bigger than us makes us bigger. It grows our souls. Now, you have the Jewish scriptures, and then there's commentary on the Jewish scriptures called the Midrash. It's rabbinical scholars commentating on the Torah, okay? And in the Midrash, they say that Moses gets into an argument with God. Point is, it's okay to argue with God sometimes. Be real. Tell God your truth. So I'm paraphrasing now in the spirit of the Midrash, okay? So Moses says, wait a minute, you want me to go to the Pharaoh, I'm a wanted man, I'm in Egypt, I'm a Hebrew, and you want me to go and tell him just okay, Pharaoh, free my fellow Hebrews. He's going to say, oh, okay, Moses, I never thought of that, thank you. You got to be crazy. He's arguing with God. So he says to God, what is your name? Because he was smart enough to know that the essence of somebody or something is in the name. See, in our use of the name, it's a label we put on somebody. In the religious world, the name represents their mission, their identity, their energy. So what he's saying, you're giving me a big job. It's way over my head. You got to tell me what your name is so I can bring the power that is in your name with me. And the Hebrews, Aye, Ashe, Aye, translated into English. Tell them I am that I am sent you. I'm not Gaia. I'm in Gaia, but I'm not Gaia. I'm in the thunder, but I'm not thunder. I'm in creation, but I'm bigger than creation. The Bhagavad Gita says the same thing, by the way. That Krishna is in everything, but transcends everything. The God that is sending Moses is the transcendental God that's above the law of cause and effect, that's above karma, that's above everything that is going on in the world. Therefore, it has the capacity to transform the world. So you go tell him, and then what God says, tell them, I am that I am with you. As who I am shall I be with you. Like I am with you in all of my power, all of my might, all of my love. I am with you. That's what you tell him. And Moses said, okay. And it said as he came down the mountain, his face was glowing with light. That's how we go from egoic consciousness to self-realization. That's how we go from living at the surface to living in our depths. That's what it means to be self-realized, to be God-realized. That's the journey. That's the map. Whether you're Jewish, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, it doesn't make a difference. That is the map. It's a universal map. So I'm going to close with a story. Now, you know how the story goes. Pharaoh says no. No, all these plagues come, and finally Pharaoh says, okay, we'll let them go. They're crossing, the river opens up, the sea opens up, they're crossing. Then Pharaoh and his chariots chase after them. The water closes, and they drown. And the Hebrews are celebrating on the other banks of the river, like, we're free, yay, this is great. And then Moses walks around, and the angel of the Lord is there. Angel of the Lord is weeping. And Moses says, why are you weeping? He said, my children drowned today. And Moses said, no, we Hebrews, we're free. We didn't drown. You parted the Red Sea for God and for us. You saved us. And then the angel said, but the Egyptians, they too are God's children. I am mourning for them. I am weeping for them. That's it. Now, there's a lot more to the story. I can't get into the rest of it. But I'll just say this. As you know, then they go back to the mountain. Moses goes up on the mountain. He gets the commandments, brings them down. I'm going to make a general statement, 2 statements. One is, whatever is best in Western civilization, whatever our best is, you see our best manifested in our Constitution. All men are created equal before God, and we all have inalienable rights. Whatever is best in our Western civilization, and there's a lot that isn't best, but there's a lot that is best. It has its roots back to Moses on the mountain. We don't know it. We don't think about it. But the essence of the Torah, the essence of the message that Moses brought down from the mountain is what is best in Western civilization. The other thing I will say is people will ask me at times, why do you think the Jews have been so persecuted? And I think there's one fundamental reason. Again, they brought what is best to Western civilization. They brought us the commandments. They brought us the prophets. And they brought us Jesus. Jesus is Jewish. Don't ever forget that. And the power of the dark powers do not like the Jewish lineage. That's why Hitler was so against them. But the same Adonai Elohim Ayayashe that was with Moses is with us today. We just have to have that courage to follow the burning bush that is inside of us. The divine in me bows before the divine in each one of you.